The night was still, the kind of stillness that wraps itself around you, making even the wind feel like it's holding its breath. A stretch of highway in Texas, long and isolated, where the only sound you could hear was the hum of tires on cracked pavement. This was the kind of road you drive down when you need to get away from everything, when you need to be alone with your thoughts. But sometimes that's when something finds you, when you least expect it. A truck driver miles from the nearest town pulled off to the side of this desolate highway. His truck was found running, lights still on, but there was no sign of life. He was gone. And what the authorities discovered next, what they found when they tried to piece together the mystery of his death, would shake them to their core. They'd never seen anything like it before. The man was dead, but it was as if time had frozen around him. His body was cold to the touch, but the truck had only been parked there for a few hours. No signs of struggle, no obvious cause of death. And the most unsettling part? He wasn't the first. What happens next will shock you. Stay tuned. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want to hear more terrifying real-life stories. It was a quiet morning in Texas, the kind of morning where the world seemed to stand still, caught between the fading night and the breaking day. The sun was barely rising, casting a faint, pale glow over a long stretch of empty highway. 4 miles, there was nothing but road, dirt, and the occasional gust of wind stirring up dust on the edges. If you've ever driven along one of these desolate highways, you'll know how quickly the silence becomes overwhelming. It's the kind of stillness that crawls under your skin, the kind where every little sound feels amplified, and the quiet feels like it's wrapping around you, tightening with every mile. Texas highways, vast and sprawling, hold a certain kind of vulnerability. They stretch on endlessly, and if something were to go wrong, no one would know. No one would be able to help. The isolation of these roads becomes its own kind of threat, a quiet menace that hangs in the air. The stretch of road this trucker was on was no different. It was open, lonely, and silent, just the way things were at that hour. But in that quiet, something was about to happen that would change everything. The trucker had been traveling for hours. Just another long haul, another stretch of pavement that blended into the same stretch of endless nothingness. His rig was a familiar sight, an old but reliable truck making its way across the vast Texas landscape. But as the sun crept higher, something strange happened. A driver on the same road, heading in the opposite direction, glanced over and saw the truck. It wasn't unusual for trucks to stop along the side of the road, especially on long stretches like this one. But there was something wrong. The truck was parked off to the side, but the engine was still running, its headlights casting an eerie light across the cracked asphalt. The road was empty, desolate, just as it had been for hours. Yet something about the scene felt wrong. The driver slowed down, instinctively feeling the weight of the silence around him. As he pulled closer, he noticed the trucker. The man was slumped over the wheel, motionless, his body hanging in a way that made it clear he wasn't just taking a nap. There was no movement, no sign that the man was alive. His arms were lifeless at his sides, his head hung forward in an unnatural position. It was as if he had just stopped. His body was completely still, frozen in time. The truck's engine idled steadily, its sound now the only thing breaking the heavy silence. But that silence? It was thick, suffocating, almost like it was pressing down on everything around it. The trucker's body was cold to the touch, but the truck had only been parked there for a short while. How could the man be so cold if he had only been there for a few hours? There were no signs of a struggle, no visible injuries. The truck was still running as if everything was normal, but something was deeply wrong. The other driver slowly pulled over and cautiously approached the truck, his footsteps seeming too loud in the stillness. He peeked inside, his eyes scanning for any clues that might explain the situation. The trucker's personal items were in their place. His wallet, his phone, everything as it should have been. Nothing seemed out of place. No broken windows, no shattered glass. It was as if the man had simply fallen asleep. But that couldn't be right. No one dies that quickly, and certainly not in the way he had. No one just drops dead in the middle of a highway with no warning. There had to be a reason, but no one could figure it out. Not then and not later. The trucker's things were untouched. His jacket was still on the seat beside him, his lunch bag tucked neatly on the floor. Everything about the scene felt wrong. There were no signs of any kind of violence, no obvious signs of distress. Just an empty body and a truck that seemed to have come to a stop at the exact moment his life had. The only thing that was left behind was the eerie quiet of the highway and the cold body that hadn't been there long enough to be this cold. The trucker's body was examined carefully, but the results didn't make sense. The cause of death couldn't be determined right away. No obvious signs of heart failure, no head trauma, no injuries. Just stillness. The only thing they could agree on was that the man had died, but no one could figure out how or why. The only thing that was certain was that the truck had been there for only a short time. It was as if something had taken him with no explanation, no warning, and then just as quickly left him there in that exact spot. A lifeless body, cold to the touch, with no answers and no explanations. Questions started piling up. How had the man died? Why was he found with no obvious signs of struggle? Why had he been left there, alone in the dark? The police officers at the scene couldn't shake the feeling that there was something they were missing, something bigger than they could explain. But they couldn't find it, couldn't put their finger on it. All they had was a dead trucker, a still running engine, and the kind of silence that wrapped around them, making every breath feel heavier, every second more unnerving than the last. But there was more. The trucker wasn't the first. The area had a history. Strange things had happened here before. People had gone missing, their cars found abandoned, their bodies never recovered. Some said it was just the remoteness of the highway. Others whispered about things that didn't belong in this world, things that walked along the sides of the roads, things that waited in the shadows. Of course, no one really knew for sure. And even now, as they began to piece together what had happened to the trucker, the question loomed over them unanswered. What was out there waiting? What had taken the driver that night? The trucker's death wasn't just an accident, and it wasn't just some unfortunate medical issue. There was something about it that didn't fit, something strange and unnerving about the way he had been found, about the way the truck had been left running, as though the man had simply vanished. It wasn't a mystery that could be solved easily. It wasn't a case that could be wrapped up with a neat little explanation. No, this was something else. And the more they looked, the darker the truth seemed to get. And so, the mystery began to grow, expanding in ways no one could have predicted. Because this wasn't just about one truck driver found dead on a highway, it was about something much bigger, something that had been hiding in plain sight, just waiting to be discovered. The first responders arrived at the scene, their headlights casting long shadows on the cracked asphalt as they pulled up to the truck. It was parked off to the side, its engine idling, the faint hum breaking the otherwise still night. The trucker had been there for hours. No one knew how long exactly, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was gone. There was nothing about the scene that made sense. The trucker's body was slumped over the wheel, lifeless, but nothing about the truck screamed accident. No skid marks, no broken glass. Everything appeared untouched, yet something about it felt so wrong. The truck was running, the lights still on, casting an eerie glow across the empty stretch of road. And the body, cold to the touch. As the officers walked closer, the air seemed to grow heavier with each step. They could hear the faint hum of the truck's engine, the sound of something so normal, so ordinary, but it felt anything but. It felt out of place, like it didn't belong there. The officer who was first to arrive on the scene took a careful step forward, his boots crunching on the gravel, each sound too loud in the quiet of the night. The truck's headlights illuminated the driver's side, revealing the man's face. His head hung forward, his hands still gripping the wheel, but there was no sign of life. He was gone. The officer crouched beside the door, his hand shaking just slightly as he reached for the handle. He opened it slowly, the door creaking as if it had been frozen in place for hours. Inside, the trucker's personal items were still neatly arranged. His wallet was tucked in the cup holder, his phone resting on the dashboard untouched. His jacket, the one he must have worn to stay warm in the night air, was still draped across the passenger seat. No sign of a struggle, no evidence that anything had gone wrong, except for the man sitting there dead. The truck was still running, the engine purring quietly, but the man's body was cold, too cold for the time the truck had been sitting there. Something wasn't adding up. The officers exchanged looks, and the unease in the air grew heavier. There was no sign of anything wrong, but there was something about the scene that didn't feel right. They tried to piece together the timeline. The trucker had been traveling on the highway alone, heading to a distant town. The dispatcher confirmed that there were no signs of distress, no calls made from the trucker's phone, no indication of anything that could explain what had happened. Just an empty stretch of road, a truck that shouldn't have been there, and a man whose body was found in the most chilling of ways. The investigation started to unfold slowly, methodically. Officers began to comb through the truck for clues. They checked the interior, opened the compartments, and examined the truck's GPS system. It wasn't much, but it was something. The trucker's route was listed, but it didn't match the path he was supposed to be on. He was supposed to be heading to a nearby town, but his GPS had registered a different route altogether. It was a strange, winding path that took him off the main highway and deep into the isolated parts of the state. Why would he take that route? Had he gotten lost? Or was there something more to it? No one could say for sure, but it was another puzzle piece that didn't fit. As the officers continued to investigate, they found more strange details. The truck's cargo was normal, nothing unusual or suspicious there. But then they found something else. A crumpled piece of paper tucked behind the driver's seat, as if it had been shoved there in haste. It was a map, but not a regular map. It was an old, weathered map, with markings and scribbles in places that didn't seem to match any standard route. The officer unfolded it carefully, his fingers tracing the lines and markings. Some areas had been highlighted in red, others circled with a thick black pen. It was as if the trucker had been following something, but what? And why leave it behind like this? There was no explanation. The map didn't lead anywhere recognizable. The roads on it were faint, unclear, as though they didn't exist on any other map. The markings on the map didn't line up with the trucker's actual route either. It was as if he had been diverted to some unknown destination, led somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. But why? And who had made the markings? Was the trucker following someone? Or was he being led somewhere else? The officers began to feel the weight of something more than just an ordinary investigation. This wasn't just an accident or a routine case. It was something deeper, something that felt off. Every piece of evidence seemed to raise more questions than answers. The trucker's death wasn't the result of a crash. There were no injuries, no signs of heart failure, no explanation for what had caused his death. His body was cold, the truck was still running, and the map, it only deepened the mystery. It was as if something had happened to him, something that couldn't be explained by any logical reasoning. As the investigation dragged on, the officers began to question everything. Could this just be an unfortunate accident? Or was something else at play here? Were they missing something? Or were they being led down a path they weren't ready to understand? One officer, a veteran of countless cases, began to speak the words that no one else wanted to voice. "Some nights the dead don't leave," he whispered. His voice was low, barely audible over the hum of the truck's engine, but the words seemed to hang in the air long after he'd spoken them. The officer's eyes flickered toward the empty road, and for a moment he seemed lost in thought. Was it just the tension getting to him, or was there something in the air, something they couldn't see? He wasn't sure. But there was a feeling, an overwhelming sense that the dead weren't just gone. They were still there somewhere, watching. And that thought, that chilling thought, began to linger with all the officers, each of them feeling it in their own way. The investigation was becoming less about finding answers and more about surviving it. The case was no longer just about a man found dead on the side of a highway. It was about uncovering something that might have been waiting there, hidden in the dark corners of the road. Something they weren't meant to find. Something that had been there long before the trucker ever arrived. And now it was staring them in the face. The investigation, now shrouded in an eerie sense of dread, seemed to move in slow motion. Every moment felt stretched, like time itself was slowing down. The police report grew longer, the interviews more haunting, the evidence more disturbing. With each new detail, the case twisted further into something beyond their comprehension, and the officers found themselves asking one question more than any other. What was really going on here? It had been days since the trucker was found dead, but the questions only grew more puzzling with each passing hour. The police had searched for answers, medical records, autopsy reports, eyewitness accounts, but nothing pointed to a clear cause of death. There were no signs of trauma, no history of health issues that could explain what happened. The trucker had been an experienced driver, someone who had spent years on the road without incident. No heart problems, no diseases. Nothing that would suggest his sudden death. Yet here he was, cold and lifeless, his truck still running. It didn't make sense. As the investigation dragged on, whispers began to spread. Officers, once skeptical, started to question if there was something more to this case than they could see. Was this simply a tragic accident? Or was there something else at play, something that couldn't be explained by the usual methods? The theories began to take shape, one more unsettling than the last. Some officers began to entertain the possibility that the trucker's death wasn't caused by anything natural at all. Perhaps it wasn't an accident. Maybe it was something paranormal. As ridiculous as it sounded, they couldn't ignore the strange feeling they got when they walked past the truck. Like they were being watched, like the road itself was alive in a way that it shouldn't have been. There were rumors among locals about this stretch of highway, whispers of a highway curse that plagued the road for years. Stories of drivers who disappeared without a trace, only to have their vehicles found days later, running with no one in sight. And worse, some claimed to have seen strange figures in the distance, shadows darting along the road, figures that seemed to flicker out of existence the moment you tried to get close. The officers began to feel it too, that sensation of being watched. It wasn't just the eerie quiet of the night, the wind blowing through the trees. It was something else, something more pressing. It was the feeling that the trucker's death wasn't the only strange thing to happen here, and it wasn't going to be the last. Late one evening, as the investigation continued, one officer made a chilling remark as he stood outside the truck, his flashlight cutting through the dark. "The dead don't always leave," he muttered, looking around the empty road. It wasn't the kind of thing you said lightly, but something about this case felt different. The wind picked up, howling through the cracked window of his patrol car. The flashlight in his hand flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the walls of the surrounding trees. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, more intense, and the officer felt his heart race as if something was just behind him, waiting. The deeper they dug into the area's history, the more unsettling it became. The stretch of highway where the trucker was found had been the site of several strange deaths over the years. incidents that had never been fully explained. In the 1950s, a similar case occurred. A driver was found on the side of the road, dead under the same mysterious circumstances. His car was parked, engine still running, but his body was frozen in time. No signs of struggle, no apparent cause of death. The police back then had no explanation either. Locals whispered that it was the work of something beyond human understanding. A curse on the road, a force that claimed the lives of those who traveled it. As the investigation continued, the officers learned more about the area's history. It was an old road, one that had been there for decades, even centuries. Long before cars and trucks, it had been used by travelers and settlers making their way through the desolate plains. Some of those travelers had never reached their destinations. Over the years, rumors had spread about ghosts that haunted the road, the restless spirits of those who had died in accidents or had disappeared without a trace. Some said the ghost of a trucker who had died in a fiery crash decades ago still wandered the highway, searching for someone else to take his place. The legends about this stretch of road were too numerous to ignore. Locals would talk about the ghostly figure of a man in a truck, his face hidden by the shadows, slowly driving alongside cars but never passing them. Other times, the sound of a truck engine could be heard, growing closer and closer, only for it to vanish when you looked in the rearview mirror. The more the investigators heard, the more the sensation of dread grew. It felt like the road was alive, waiting for something, watching those who traveled it. Late one night, as the wind howled and the air grew colder, one officer stood on the side of the road, staring down the empty highway. He felt the tension rise in his chest, like something was about to happen. The shadows seemed to stretch further than they should have, and the silence around him felt unnatural. He glanced at the truck, now a quiet, lifeless shell of what it once was. The streetlights above him buzzed intermittently, casting long, distorted shadows on the pavement. It was in that moment that he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. He quickly turned to look, but there was nothing. Just the same empty road. But the feeling remained, something was out there watching. As the investigation continued, officers couldn't deny the unsettling truth. Whether it was coincidence, a strange twist of fate, or something they couldn't explain, the road had a history. And now it had claimed another victim. The trucker's death had opened a door, and with it came a flood of questions no one had answers for. Was it just an accident? Or was there something on this highway, something ancient and dangerous, that had claimed the lives of those before him? And now had it claimed him too? As they looked further into the case, they couldn't help but wonder, what was it that waited on this highway? What had taken the trucker and why? There were no clear answers, only the growing sense that whatever was behind this, whatever force haunted these roads, was still there, still waiting for its next victim. The investigation had been dragging on for days, and with every passing hour, the officers found themselves more and more perplexed. They had all the clues: the truck, the driver's body, a trail that seemed to go cold with every lead. No one could explain it. There were no signs of foul play, no injuries to the trucker, and no clear cause of death. The trucker, a man who had been on the road for years, had died with no explanation, and no one could make sense of it. What made it worse was that no one could figure out why the truck had been there at all. The route was supposed to be straight, simple. He had no reason to be on that stretch of road, a long, desolate highway with nothing but land and sky for miles. The area had a reputation, but it wasn't one anyone ever really took seriously. Local legends, whispers about the road, the ghosts that supposedly haunted it, all of it had always been chalked up to the usual kind of local folklore. Nothing to fear, nothing to think about. But as they pieced together the driver's final moments, one detail stood out, something no one had thought to look at before: the trucker's final route. The dispatcher had double-checked his schedule, and that's when they noticed something strange. The trucker had been scheduled to take a different route altogether, one that would have brought him to a neighboring town. But instead, he veered off course, heading down a stretch of highway that wasn't on his route at all. A stretch of road that, unbeknownst to him, was infamous for strange, unexplained occurrences. It wasn't a stretch of highway you drove down by accident. It was a stretch of highway you avoided if you knew what was good for you. But the trucker had no idea. He was just doing his job. He had no clue that he was heading straight towards something that had claimed the lives of others before him. The investigation team had stumbled upon something that would change the direction of the entire case. This wasn't just another freak accident or a routine death. This was something else. Something much more disturbing. They started digging into the history of this stretch of road, looking at past reports, other incidents that had happened there. What they found was chilling. There were cases of drivers getting lost, of cars running out of gas when the tank was full, of engines suddenly cutting out for no reason. But it wasn't just that. People had died on this road, strange deaths, unexplained disappearances. Drivers found themselves on that stretch of highway and never returned. It was as if the road itself had claimed them. The more they uncovered, the more the eerie sense of unease began to take hold. This wasn't just a tragic mistake. The trucker hadn't just veered off course by accident. No, there was something guiding him toward that road, something that had been waiting for him. It was as if he had been drawn there, led by something beyond his control. But what? And why? One officer, who had been working the case from the beginning, found himself sinking deeper into his own thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every time he looked at the trucker's body, every time he re-examined the evidence, the unease grew stronger. He remembered the stories from locals, the rumors that no one took seriously. He remembered the old urban legends about the road, the ones they'd all laughed off as just that, legends. But now he wasn't so sure. And then he remembered something. A moment from his own past, something he had never fully understood until now. Years ago, he had driven that same stretch of highway late one night, just like the trucker had. It was a dark, quiet night, and the road stretched out before him like an endless tunnel. He had been on the road for hours, the fatigue settling in when he first felt it, the sensation that something was wrong. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. As he drove, he saw something out of the corner of his eye. At first, it was just a shadow on the side of the road, but as he got closer, it became clearer. A figure. A man standing at the edge of the highway, his body partially obscured by the darkness. The officer's headlights cut through the night, casting a pale light over the figure, but just as quickly the man vanished. The officer slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding. He looked in his rearview mirror, but there was nothing there. No one. No sign of the figure at all. The officer had shaken it off, assuming it was just his mind playing tricks on him, fatigue setting in. But that feeling, the feeling that he wasn't alone, that something was watching him, lingered in his mind for days. He had never told anyone about it, thinking they would laugh at him. But now, standing in front of the truck and staring at the body, everything came rushing back. What if the trucker hadn't just gotten lost? What if something had led him there, something that had been waiting for him? The officer couldn't ignore it anymore. The pieces were starting to fit together in a way that didn't make sense. This wasn't just another accident. This was something else. Something darker, something older, something that had been waiting for the right moment to claim its next victim. The more he thought about it, the more it felt like the trucker had been chosen, pulled toward the road for reasons he couldn't understand. The trucker hadn't known what was waiting for him, but now the officer was beginning to think that maybe the road had known all along. Maybe it had been waiting for someone else to walk into its trap. As the officer stood there, staring at the trucker's lifeless body, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. The streetlights above flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. The air felt thick as though it was pressing down on him, suffocating him. His flashlight trembled in his hand as he looked out into the darkness. The road stretched ahead of him, quiet, empty, but it no longer felt like just a road. It felt like something else, something that had been waiting for someone to take the wrong turn. And now that someone was gone, the officer could no longer shake the feeling that the trucker had been led here, drawn down that road by something he could never have understood. And as he looked into the darkness ahead, he couldn't help but wonder who would be next. The investigation had gone on long enough for the officers to feel they were reaching the point of no return. They had gathered all the facts, or at least what they thought were the facts. The trucker was dead, and there didn't seem to be a reason why. No signs of injury, no health issues, no accidents. But something kept gnawing at the back of their minds. What were they missing? Something didn't add up, something they hadn't seen before. One evening, an officer was carefully inspecting the truck's side mirrors, something that hadn't been properly checked during the initial investigation. At first glance, the mirrors seemed just like any other, covered with a layer of dust as expected from the long journey. But as the officer wiped them down, something caught the light, something strange. The markings were subtle, nearly hidden, but they were there. Odd symbols, etched into the mirrors with a precision that couldn't be done by accident. Small, cryptic markings that didn't belong. He stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it, running his fingers over the symbols. They didn't seem to make sense. There was no logical reason for them to be there. These weren't scratches or damage from the road. They looked deliberate, almost ritualistic. There was something about the symbols that made his skin crawl, something ancient and unsettling in their design. His first thought was that they were part of a cult, something out of place in a regular trucker's life. But who would do this? Why would they mark the mirrors like this? As the officer stepped back from the truck, he recalled the rumors he had heard from locals, the ones he had brushed off before. They spoke of an old legend, a ghostly figure that haunted the highway, a trucker spirit cursed to forever drive the road. They said the spirit had died in a horrific crash years ago, and since then, it had been seeking revenge on anyone who dared drive down that stretch of highway. The story sounded like something straight out of a campfire tale, until now. With the markings on the truck mirrors, the ghostly rumors didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. The officer's unease grew, and as he shared the discovery with the rest of the team, a pattern started to emerge. They began to dig deeper into the history of the area, and what they found made their blood run cold. In the 1980s, a trucker had been killed on that very stretch of road, his body crushed beneath his truck in a fiery crash. Witnesses said that they saw a dark figure standing on the side of the road just before the crash, watching. It was said that the figure vanished the moment the trucker died. And in the years since, others had reported seeing the same figure. They would see headlights in the distance or hear the sound of a truck coming up behind them, only to turn around and find nothing. The team began to realize that there was more to this case than just a random accident. The trucker had not just died. He had been led here like all the others before him. He had been chosen. Chosen by something that waited on that road, something that had been waiting for years. The investigators now feared that the trucker's death wasn't just an accident. It was a part of something much larger. A dark pattern. And the more they uncovered, the more they feared the truth. The death of this trucker wasn't just random. It was a sacrifice. Sacrifice to something far darker, something that had been pulling drivers toward that road for decades. This wasn't a coincidence. The trucker had been led there, guided by something unseen, something malevolent, something ancient. He wasn't the first, and if they didn't stop it, he wouldn't be the last. The tension among the investigators grew as they exchanged their findings, a sense of dread hanging in the air. No one knew what to do next. How could they stop something like this? something that seemed to transcend the natural world, something that was waiting, watching, and pulling people in. No one knew what had started this curse or why it had chosen the trucker, but they couldn't ignore the pattern. They couldn't deny what they were seeing. Something had been waiting for him on that highway, and now it had claimed him. The officers huddled together, trying to make sense of the evidence, but the more they talked, the more the pieces began to fall into place, and the more terrified they became. The symbols on the truck mirrors weren't just random scratches. They were a sign, a warning. This wasn't just a ghostly spirit. It was something that had been haunting that stretch of road for years, waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone to come along and drive down the highway, unknowing, unsuspecting. It became clear now. The trucker hadn't just been driving to his destination. He had been walking into a trap set by something that had claimed others before him and would continue to claim more unless someone stopped it. But who could stop something like this? How could they fight something that was not bound by the rules of the world they knew? The officer who had first felt the fear creeping up on him now found himself staring into the darkness of the highway. He recalled his own encounter, that figure on the side of the road. The figure that vanished when he looked back. And now, as the investigation continued, the question burned in his mind. Could the trucker's death have been a warning? A warning that something was coming for them all? The chilling truth started to sink in. They had uncovered a pattern, an ancient force that had been pulling people toward this cursed highway for years. And the trucker wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. The highway was waiting, and it was only a matter of time before someone else drove down that same road, walking right into the trap. And no one would be able to stop it. Not until it was too late. The investigation had taken its toll. The days of sifting through evidence, piecing together the trucker's final moments, had begun to wear on the officers. The questions, the unease, the strange feelings, it all started to build up, layer by layer, until it felt like it was suffocating them. No one could shake the sense that they were being watched. The deeper they dug, the more unsettling things became. It wasn't just the case itself that had them rattled. It was the odd occurrences that started happening around them. At first, it was subtle, little things that made them question if they were just imagining things. The sound of footsteps echoing behind them when no one was there. Shadows in the corner of their vision, always just out of reach but never quite fading. And the feeling of being watched, a weight that seemed to hang in the air whenever they were near the highway. It wasn't the kind of fear that came from being in an unfamiliar place. It was the kind of fear that crept up from inside, as though something had taken root in their minds, feeding on their own doubts and insecurities. One night, as they pored over the case files, one investigator noticed his hands were shaking. He couldn't remember when it had started, but he couldn't stop it. He tried to steady them, but the more he focused on his task, the more his hands trembled. It wasn't the kind of shaking that came from cold or fear. It was something deeper, something darker. A quiet terror, something he couldn't explain, something that was starting to eat away at him. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The trucker's death wasn't just a mystery. It was a curse. And now it had its eyes on them. Another investigator, feeling the weight of the case pressing down on him, stood still in the dark, staring out at the highway. The cold wind swept through the trees, but he didn't feel it. He couldn't. His mind was far away, lost in the questions, the doubts. What was waiting for them out there? What was it that had led the trucker to his death, and what was it that had been pulling at their own minds, one thread at a time? The highway seemed to stretch on forever, endless and empty, yet filled with something that didn't belong. Something that couldn't be understood no matter how hard they tried. He could feel it in the air, in the silence. It was like something was waiting, watching, just beyond the edge of the world they knew. It wasn't just paranoia. The fear was real, and it was growing stronger with each passing day. The deeper they went into the investigation, the more they felt the pull of something ancient and unknowable. They tried to dismiss it, to focus on the facts, but the facts weren't adding up. And with every unanswered question, the fear grew, gnawing at the edges of their minds. One investigator, unable to shake the feeling, returned to the highway that night. He told himself he was just going to check the area one last time, to look for any clues they might have missed. But as he drove down the empty road, the fear gripped him in a way he couldn't explain. The headlights of his car barely cut through the darkness, the shadows stretching long and deep in every direction. His breath caught in his throat as he passed the exact spot where the trucker had been found. He thought he saw something moving in the corner of his eye, just a shadow, but it was enough to make his heart race. He slowed the car, his eyes darting around, searching the road. Nothing. Just the emptiness, the same endless stretch of highway that had claimed the trucker. He was about to turn around when something caught his eye. Just off to the side of the road, under the trees, a figure. At first, he thought it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. But then he saw it move. A body slumped in a way that seemed eerily familiar. He couldn't breathe. He had to get out of the car. His heart pounded in his chest as he stepped out onto the road, each footstep echoing in the silence. The figure was too still, too lifeless. As he approached, the light from his flashlight fell across the body, and there it was. Another trucker. Another body. Just like the first. He staggered backward, his breath coming in short gasps. The body was cold, just like the first one, and there was no sign of injury, no sign of struggle. It was as though the man had just fallen asleep on the side of the road, never to wake up. His truck had been left behind, just like the first one, with its engine still running. The investigator stumbled back to his car, panic rising in his chest. He couldn't understand it. Another body, another victim. It was happening again. Whatever was out there, it wasn't done yet. As the investigator sat in his car, hands shaking, heart racing, he realized that they hadn't just uncovered a string of accidents or strange deaths. They had uncovered something far worse. Something that was reaching out, claiming its victims one by one. The fear that had been growing inside him now felt like a physical presence, pressing down on him from all sides. Whatever had taken the trucker's life was still out there, and now it had claimed another. The investigation wasn't over. It had only just begun. But one thing was certain. The road had claimed its victims before, and it would claim more. The curse wasn't over, and it was only a matter of time before someone else drove down that same highway, only to be pulled into the darkness that waited. The investigation has ended, or so it seems. But deep down, the questions remain unanswered, and the eerie silence of the highway still lingers, creeping into the thoughts of everyone who's been part of this case. What happened to the truck driver? Was he just another victim of a tragic accident, a mistake in the quiet darkness of the road? Or was there something much darker at work here, something unseen that led him down that stretch of highway to his death? The answers seemed to slip away like sand through your fingers. The more the officers looked, the more they uncovered, but nothing added up. The body was cold, the truck was still running, and the driver's personal items were untouched. An eerie stillness settled around every detail. Could it really have been just an accident? Or was there something more, something older, hiding just beneath the surface? And now, another body has been discovered, eerily similar to the first, left in the same spot on that desolate highway. What could it mean? What is waiting on that stretch of road, and why has it claimed so many lives? Could it be that the road itself is cursed, or is something else entirely at play? Something that has existed far longer than any of us care to understand? These questions remain unanswered and unsettling. Some mysteries are meant to stay hidden, left in the dark where they belong. But sometimes the answers we seek are far more terrifying than the unknown itself. What if the truth behind these deaths is a truth we aren't prepared to face? As the investigation fades into the distance, the road remains the same, empty, cold, waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler. Who will it be? And what will happen when they make the wrong turn? The road hasn't finished its dark work, and neither has the mystery. Not yet. If you want to know what happens next, if you want to hear more unsettling stories like this one, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Do you think there's a supernatural force behind these deaths, or is it all just a twisted coincidence? We want to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments below.